The massive, hair-covered figure on security camera feed was dragging my coworker's body toward the tree line, and it was staring directly into the lens. I'm Jake Morrison, and I've been working night security at Cascade Timber's remote logging operation for 3 years now. It's honest work, decent pay, and most nights are quiet enough that I can catch up on my online courses. But last Tuesday night, that's when everything changed. That's when I learned that some jobs aren't worth the paycheck. Let me back up a bit. Cascade Timber runs one of the last old-growth logging operations in the Oregon Cascades, about 40 miles from the nearest town. The isolation is part of the appeal. No traffic, no crowds, just me in the forest from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My job is simple. Monitor the security cameras, check the equipment yards twice per shift, and make sure nobody's stealing our million-dollar machinery. The logging camp sits in a valley surrounded by Douglas firs that have been growing since before Columbus sailed. During the day, crews work the nearby slopes, but at night, it's dead quiet except for the occasional elk or black bear wandering through. Or at least, that's what I thought. It started 3 weeks ago, with small things. Tools going missing from the equipment yard, chainsaws found 20 feet from where they'd been left, chains snapped clean in half, fuel tanks drained overnight. The day crew blamed it on vandals, maybe environmental activists trying to shut down the operation. Management installed more cameras. That's when I started seeing the shadows. At first, I thought it was equipment malfunction. These cameras are decent, but they're not military grade. Dark shapes moving between the machinery, just at the edge of the floodlight's reach. Whenever I'd check the recorded footage during my rounds, there'd be nothing there, just empty frames of the equipment yard. But the feeling of being watched, that never went away. 2 weeks ago, the missing equipment problem got worse. The entire shipping container of replacement saw blades vanished overnight. The container wasn't just emptied, it was crushed. Like something with incredible strength had squeezed it between massive hands. The metal was twisted into impossible shapes, and there were deep gouges in the steel that looked almost like claw marks. Jerry Kowalski, the day shift foreman, found it when he arrived at 6 a.m. He called me over before I clocked out, his face pale under his hard hat. "Jake, what the hell happened here? Did you see anything on the cameras?" I pulled up the footage from the night before, scanning through hours of recording. Nothing. The container was there at midnight during my first round, and gone by 5 a.m. during my final check, but the camera showed absolutely nothing in between. Maybe the hard drives are corrupting, I suggested, but Jerry shook his head. Those are brand new systems. Cost the company 30 grand to install. He kicked at a twisted piece of metal. This looks like a tornado hit it, but the weather was clear all night. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were enormous, easily 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, pressed deep into the muddy ground around the destroyed container. The stride length was impossible for any human, and they had 5 toes that ended in what looked like thick claws. Bear prints are familiar to me after 3 years in these woods, but these were different. These prints showed a creature that walked upright. "Jerry," I said quietly, pointing at the tracks. "You seeing this?" He followed my gaze and went even paler. Jesus Christ. What kind of animal makes prints like that? Neither of us had an answer. Management brought in a security specialist the next day, a former cop named Rodriguez who specialized in industrial theft. He spent hours reviewing camera footage, checking equipment, and interviewing the crews. His conclusion: professional thieves with heavy machinery. They're using some kind of signal jammer to disrupt the cameras, he explained to me and Jerry. Probably loading everything onto trucks and hauling it out through the old logging roads. We need motion sensors, better lighting, maybe some guards with patrol dogs. I wanted to believe him. A criminal gang made more sense than whatever was making those footprints. but Rodriguez hadn't been there at 3 a.m. when the forest goes completely silent. He hadn't felt those eyes watching from the darkness beyond the floodlights. Last week, things escalated. I was doing my midnight equipment check when I heard the sound. A low, guttural call that seemed to come from every direction at once. It wasn't quite human, but wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. The sound raised every hair on my body and sent a primal chill down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, scanning the tree line around the equipment yard. Nothing moved, but the forest had gone dead silent. No owls, no rustling leaves, no insect chirps, just that oppressive silence that means something dangerous is nearby. "Base to Jake," my radio crackled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Jake here." I whispered back, "Everything okay out there?" "Your last check-in was 20 minutes ago." I realized I'd been standing frozen in place, listening to that terrible silence. "Yeah, everything's..." Wait. One of the skidders, a 40-ton piece of machinery used to drag logs out of the forest, had been moved. I was certain it had been parked near the maintenance shed, but now it sat in the middle of the yard, turned at an odd angle. "There's been some equipment movement," I radioed. Checking it out now, I approached the skidder carefully, flashlight beam dancing across its yellow hull. The machine looked undamaged, but as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Massive handprints covered the operator's cabin, prints so large they wrapped around the entire steel frame. Whatever had moved this machine had hands nearly twice the size of mine, and they were still warm to the touch. I stumbled backward, radio slipping from my trembling fingers. Something was out there in the darkness, something impossibly strong and getting bolder. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing against my chest. That's when I saw the eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam from about 30 feet away, positioned at least 8 feet off the ground. For a moment, we stared at each other, me, paralyzed with fear, and whatever it was, simply watching. The eyes were intelligent, calculating, almost human, but not quite right. Then it was gone, melting back into the forest without a sound. I spent the rest of that shift locked in the security trailer, watching the camera feeds and jumping at every shadow. When the day crew arrived, I didn't mention the encounter. Who would believe me? Giant footprints could be faked, moved equipment could be explained, but glowing eyes in the darkness? They'd think I was losing my mind, but I started carrying a gun 3 nights ago. We lost Tommy Breslin. Tommy was one of the younger crew members, a logger who sometimes worked late to earn overtime. He'd been cutting up some downed trees near the south boundary when his shift should have ended. His supervisor assumed he'd gone home, and I assumed he'd checked out with the day shift. Nobody realized he was missing until his wife called the next morning. The search party found his hard hat and work gloves about a quarter mile into the forest, but no other trace of him. The local sheriff organized a proper search with dogs and volunteers, but after 2 days, they found nothing. Tommy had simply vanished. I knew better. I'd seen those eyes, felt that presence watching from the darkness. Tommy hadn't just wandered off or had an accident. Something had taken him. That night, I started staying in the security trailer after my shift ended, using the excuse of overtime paperwork. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever took Tommy wasn't finished. The cameras had captured nothing. They never did, but I could sense it out there, moving through the forest like a shadow. Last night, everything came to a head. I was monitoring the cameras around 2 a.m. when movement caught my eye on monitor 6, the feed covering the main equipment yard. A dark shape moved between the machines, too large and upright to be a bear. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the contrast. The figure stepped into a pool of floodlight, and my world tilted. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Its shoulders were broad enough to span a doorway, and its arms hung nearly to its knees. But it was the face that froze my blood. Partially human, but wrong somehow, with a pronounced brow ridge and eyes that gleamed with unmistakable intelligence. It was carrying something. As the creature moved closer to the camera, I could make out what it held. Tommy's bright orange work vest, still attached to a limp form. The thing was dragging Tommy's body toward the tree line, and even through the grainy security feed, I could see that Tommy wasn't moving. But worse than that, much worse, was that the creature looked directly into the camera as it passed. Those intelligent eyes stared into the lens like it knew I was watching, like it wanted me to see what it had done. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "This is base security. I need immediate backup at the equipment yard. We have an intruder." But even as I spoke, I knew no one would arrive in time. The nearest sheriff's deputy was 40 minutes away, and this thing, this creature, would be long gone by then. I watched helplessly as it dragged Tommy's body into the forest, disappearing between the massive tree trunks. The monitor showed empty equipment yard again, just machines sitting silent in the floodlights. When the deputies finally arrived, I showed them the footage. They watched the dark shape moving across the screen, but the image quality was too poor to make out details. To them, it looked like a person in dark clothing, probably one of the thieves the security expert had theorized about. "We'll dust for prints and set up a perimeter," the lead deputy told me. "If they're dragging bodies around, they're escalating to kidnapping or worse. You did the right thing calling it in. They never found Tommy's body." The search dogs lost his scent about 100 yards into the forest, at a creek that would wash away any trail. The official theory is that environmental extremists killed him and disposed of the body to send a message to the logging company, but I know what I saw on that camera feed. I know those weren't human hands that moved the 40-ton skidder, and I know that whatever's living in these woods sees us as intruders in its territory. I'm writing this on my last night at Cascade Timber. Tomorrow, I'm driving back to Portland and finding a nice, safe job in an office building. Let someone else watch those cameras and pretend the shadows are just tricks of light, because the thing in the woods isn't done with us. I can feel it out there right now, watching the security trailer, waiting for its next opportunity. And I'm not going to give it one. The forest can keep its secrets. Some jobs just aren't worth the paycheck. But if you're ever driving through the Oregon Cascades and you see a logging operation tucked back in the trees, maybe keep driving. And if you work nights in isolated places like I did, pay attention to those feelings when the hair on your neck stands up. Sometimes your instincts are trying to save your life. Trust me on that one. I wish I'd listened to mine sooner, before I had to watch something drag my coworker into the darkness, staring into that camera like it was sending me a message. The message was clear. We were never alone out there. We were never safe. And some places belonged to creatures that were here long before we showed up with our machines and our lights. I just hope Tommy's family finds peace somehow. And I hope whatever's in those woods stays there, content with its territory and its secrets. But deep down, I know it won't. It's had a taste now of what we are, what we fear. And judging by those intelligent eyes staring into the camera, it's still hungry. If you've made it this far into my story, you're probably wondering if I'm making this up, if maybe the stress and isolation got to me. I wish that were true. I really do. But sometimes reality is stranger and more terrifying than anything we could imagine. Sometimes there are things in the dark that our ancestors knew to fear, things that modern civilization has forgotten about but that never forgot about us. So next time you're alone in the wilderness, pay attention to that feeling of being watched. Listen when the forest goes quiet. And if you see eyes reflecting in the darkness, don't stick around to get a better look. Some encounters are meant to be survived, not solved. And some secrets are better left buried in the deep woods, where they belong. Take it from someone who learned that lesson the hard way. My daughter whispered that the big hairy man wanted her to come play in the woods, but there were only supposed to be 3 of us on this camping trip. I'm Ben Rodriguez, and up until last month, I thought the hardest part of being a single dad was figuring out how to braid Emma's hair for school. Turns out I was wrong. The hardest part is keeping your 8-year-old daughter alive when something ancient and hungry decides it wants her. The divorce finalized in March, and Emma had been staying with her mom most weekends. I could see the distance growing between us, not her fault, just the reality of split custody and a dad who worked too many hours at the auto shop. When I suggested a camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula for just the 2 of us, her face lit up for the first time in months. "Just you and me, Daddy?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Just you and me, kiddo. No phones, no tablets, no mom's new boyfriend, Steve." I ruffled her dark hair. 3 days of s'mores and hiking, and whatever other adventure we can find. I'd been camping in Olympic National Park before, back when Rebecca and I were still trying to save our marriage. The remote areas are stunning. Ancient rainforests, crystal clear lakes, and enough wilderness to make you feel like you're the only people on Earth. Perfect for some father-daughter bonding. I should have remembered that feeling alone in the wilderness isn't always a good thing. We drove up on a Friday afternoon in early June, my truck loaded with a borrowed 2-person tent, sleeping bags, and enough granola bars to feed a small army. Emma chattered the entire 3-hour drive, excited about seeing bears and maybe wolves. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, grateful to see her smile again. "Will there be scary animals, Daddy?" she asked as we turned onto the gravel road leading to our campsite. "Maybe some black bears, but they're more afraid of us than we are of them," I told her. "We'll hang our food up high so they can't get to it." "What about monsters?" I laughed. "No monsters, Emma. Just regular forest animals." Famous last words. We found a perfect spot beside Lake Cushman, about 2 miles from the nearest occupied campsite. The isolation was intentional. I wanted Emma to experience real wilderness, not some crowded campground with RVs and generators. We set up our tent in a small clearing surrounded by massive old-growth cedars, their canopy so thick it filtered the afternoon sunlight into green-tinted beams. Emma immediately started exploring, collecting pine cones and interesting rocks while I got our camp organized. She found a fallen log that she declared her princess throne and spent an hour arranging her treasures around it like some kind of woodland shrine. "Daddy, look what I made," she called out, gesturing to her collection. I walked over to admire her work. Pine cones arranged in careful patterns, smooth river stones stacked in small pyramids, and wildflowers tucked between pieces of moss. It was actually quite artistic for an 8-year-old. "That's beautiful, kiddo. Very organized." She beamed at the praise. "The forest told me how to make it pretty." Kids say things like that, imaginative explanations for their creativity. I didn't think anything of it then. I should have. Our first night was perfect. We cooked hot dogs over the campfire, made s'mores that got more marshmallow on Emma's face than in her mouth, and told stories while the flames crackled between us. As darkness fell, I pointed out constellations, and Emma made up her own stories about the star patterns. "That one looks like a giant dog," she said, pointing at what I thought might be Ursa Major. "Yeah? What's the dog doing?" "He's watching over all the forest animals, making sure they're safe." She snuggled closer to me in the camping chair we were sharing. "Do you think he watches over little girls too?" "Of course he does, and so do daddies." We crawled into the tent around 9 p.m., Emma exhausted from the day's adventures. She fell asleep immediately, but I lay awake for a while, listening to the forest sounds. Owl hoots, rustling leaves, and the distant splash of something large entering the lake. Peaceful sounds that should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was listening to us. I woke up around 3 a.m. to find Emma's sleeping bag empty. Panic hit me like ice water. I unzipped the tent frantically, stumbling outside in my boxers and t-shirt, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the campsite. Emma, where are you? I found her about 20 feet from our tent, standing perfectly still at the edge of the tree line, staring into the darkness. She was in her pajamas and bare feet, but she didn't seem cold or scared. Emma! I ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. What are you doing out here? You scared me to death. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes, like she was just waking up. Daddy, why are we outside? You tell me. I woke up and you were gone. She looked around, confused. I don't remember. I think I was dreaming about the big dog from the stars. I scooped her up and carried her back to the tent, checking her feet for cuts or thorns. She seemed fine, just disoriented. Sleepwalking wasn't uncommon in kids, especially in new environments. I made a mental note to zip our sleeping bags together the next night. Emma, you can't go outside without Daddy, okay? Even if you're having a dream. Okay, Daddy. I'm sorry. But as I tucked her back into her sleeping bag, she whispered something that made my skin crawl. The big hairy man said he wanted to show me something pretty in the woods. I froze. What big hairy man, kiddo? In my dream, he was really tall and had long brown hair all over. He smelled funny, like wet dirt and old leaves. She yawned. He seemed nice, but his eyes were sad. Children's nightmares. That's what I told myself as I lay awake for the rest of the night. Ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. Kids have vivid imaginations, especially in new places. The creaking trees and night sounds had probably influenced her dreams, but I couldn't explain the footprints I found the next morning. They circled our entire campsite. Massive prints, easily twice the size of my own feet. The stride length was enormous, and they were pressed deep into the soft earth around our tent. Whatever made them had to weigh at least 400 pounds and walk upright. I knelt beside one of the clearest prints, measuring it with my hand. 18 inches long, with distinct toe marks that showed claws, not bear tracks. I'd seen plenty of those. These were something else entirely. Daddy, what are those? Emma asked, appearing beside me with a granola bar in her hand. Just animal tracks, sweetheart. Probably a big deer, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. No deer made tracks like these, and no deer would circle a campsite like a predator marking territory. They look like the big hairy man's feet, Emma said matter-of-factly. My blood went cold. Emma, what do you mean? From my dream. His feet were really big, like those tracks. She took a bite of her granola bar. Can we go see if he's still here? Maybe he wants to be friends. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Emma, listen to me. We don't approach strange animals in the forest, okay? Some animals can be dangerous, even if they seem friendly. She nodded solemnly. Okay, Daddy. I spent that morning packing up our campsite, telling myself we should head home early. Something wasn't right here, and my protective instincts were screaming at me to get Emma somewhere safe. But every time I suggested leaving, she begged to stay another night. Please, Daddy, we're having so much fun, and I want to see if the big dog star comes out again tonight. Her disappointment was heartbreaking. This was supposed to be our special time together, our chance to reconnect. Was I really going to let some weird animal tracks ruin that? Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the tracks were from a bear, and my imagination was filling in the details. We stayed. That afternoon, we hiked one of the shorter trails, Emma chattering about everything she saw. Butterflies, interesting fungi, a family of chipmunks that let her get surprisingly close. She seemed completely normal, just a happy kid enjoying the outdoors. But I kept feeling like we were being watched. It started as a subtle sensation. That prickling feeling you get when someone's staring at you. I turn around, scanning the forest behind us, but never saw anything except trees and shadows. Still, the feeling persisted throughout our hike. Emma seemed oblivious to my nervousness. She skipped ahead on the trail, stopping to examine flowers or call my attention to interesting rocks. But a couple of times, I caught her looking off into the forest and smiling, like she was seeing something I couldn't. "What are you looking at, kiddo?" I asked during one of these instances. "Just the trees, Daddy. They're so pretty." But her eyes were focused on something specific, tracking movement I couldn't detect. We returned to camp as the sun was setting, and I immediately noticed something wrong. Emma's careful arrangement of pine cones and stones had been rearranged, not scattered or destroyed, but deliberately reorganized into different patterns. The stones were now stacked in a single, tall pyramid, and the pine cones formed a perfect circle around it. "Emma, did you change your forest art?" She looked at her collection and gasped with delight. "No, but it's even prettier now. Someone must have fixed it for me." That someone. I was starting to have a very bad feeling about who or what that might be. "Emma, I want you to stay close to me tonight, okay? Don't wander around the campsite." "Why, Daddy? Are you scared?" "Just being careful. That's what daddies do." We cooked dinner and tried to maintain the fun atmosphere of the previous night, but I was too on edge to relax. Every shadow seemed to hide something watching us. Every forest sound made me reach for the flashlight. Emma seemed to sense my mood because she stayed unusually close, not venturing far from the fire. As we were getting ready for bed, she tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, what if the big hairy man comes back tonight?" "What makes you think he might come back?" "He told me he would. In my dream, he said he had something special to show me." I knelt down to her level, taking her hands in mine. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. If you have any dreams tonight about anyone wanting you to go anywhere, you wake me up immediately. Don't go outside. Don't follow anyone. Just wake Daddy up. Can you promise me that?" She nodded seriously. "I promise, Daddy, but promises are hard to keep when you're 8 years old and something is calling to you in the darkness." I woke up around 2 a.m. to find Emma's sleeping bag empty again. This time, I didn't panic. I grabbed my flashlight and the baseball bat I'd packed for bears and headed outside immediately. I found her about 50 feet from our tent, standing at the same spot where I'd found her the night before. But this time, she wasn't alone. The creature stood just inside the tree line, partially hidden by shadow but clearly visible in my flashlight beam. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that hung in matted clumps. Its shoulders were broader than any human's, and its arms hung nearly to its knees. But it was the face that stopped my heart. Partially human but wrong somehow, with a pronounced brow ridge and eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. It was looking directly at Emma, and she was looking back without any sign of fear. "Emma!" I shouted, running toward her. "Get away from that thing!" The creature's head snapped toward me, and I saw intelligence in those reflecting eyes. Not just animal cunning, but real awareness. It studied me for a moment, then looked back at Emma with what I can only describe as longing. Then it melted back into the forest without a sound. I grabbed Emma and carried her back to the tent, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. She was completely limp in my arms, still in that sleepy, trance-like state. "Emma! Emma! Wake up!" I shook her gently as I zipped the tent closed behind us. She blinked slowly, looking around in confusion. "Daddy? Why are you yelling? Did you see it? The thing in the forest? What thing?" She seemed genuinely puzzled. I was dreaming about the big hairy man again. He wanted to show me his home in the deep woods. He said it was beautiful and safe, and that he was lonely. I felt sick. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just watching Emma. It was somehow communicating with her, calling to her while she slept, and she was responding to it. "Emma, we're leaving first thing in the morning. But Daddy, we have one more day. I don't care. We're going home." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back against the tent wall, baseball bat across my knees, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Around 4 a.m., I heard it, a low, mournful call that seemed to echo from every direction at once. It was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard, filled with an ache that made my chest tight. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. The calling continued for about 10 minutes, then faded away. But I could feel it out there, watching our tent, waiting for another opportunity. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. I had everything packed and loaded in the truck by 7 a.m., despite Emma's protests. She kept looking back at the forest as we drove away, her face pressed against the passenger window. "Daddy, I think he just wanted a friend," she said quietly as we reached the main road. "What do you mean?" "The big hairy man. In my dreams, he seemed so sad and lonely, like he wanted someone to play with." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Emma, that wasn't a man. That was something else. Something dangerous. But he was nice to me. He never tried to hurt me, kiddo. Just because something seems nice doesn't mean it's safe. Some things that want to hurt us pretend to be friendly first." She was quiet for the rest of the drive home, but I caught her staring out the window with a wistful expression. Whatever connection she'd formed with that creature, it wasn't entirely severed. Over the next few weeks, Emma seemed to adjust back to normal life. She played with her friends, did well in school, and only occasionally mentioned the big hairy man from our camping trip. I started to think maybe the whole experience had just been a child's overactive imagination combined with some very unfortunate timing. Then I found the drawings. Emma had always been artistic, but suddenly all her pictures featured the same subject: a tall, dark figure standing among trees. In every drawing, the figure had long arms, covered in brown scribbles that I realized was her attempt at drawing fur. And in every drawing, a small girl stood nearby, holding the figure's massive hand. "Emma, what are these pictures of?" "My friend from the forest. I dream about him sometimes." She pointed to the small figure. "That's me, and that's him. We're playing hide and seek in his home." I felt that familiar chill of dread. "Sweetie, those were just dreams. The thing we saw in the forest wasn't real." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. The creature had been very real, and somehow it had formed a connection with my daughter that distance couldn't break. The dreams continued. Emma would wake up talking about visiting the hairy man's house in the deep woods, about playing games with him and exploring his forest home. She described things: caves behind waterfalls, hidden clearings filled with flowers, animal friends that the creature introduced her to. "He misses me, Daddy," she told me one morning over breakfast. "He says I'm the first friend he's had in a very long time. Emma, you need to stop talking about this. It's not real, but it feels real. And he's so lonely." Her eyes filled with tears. "Can we go visit him again? Please?" "Absolutely not." But the pleading didn't stop. Every day, Emma begged to go back to the forest. She drew more pictures, told more stories about her friend, and started having trouble sleeping because the dreams were so vivid. I took her to a child psychologist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in children processing trauma. I explained the camping trip, the sleepwalking, the creature we'd encountered. It's not uncommon for children to create imaginary friends after frightening experiences, she explained. Emma's mind may be trying to process what she saw by making it less threatening, turning a scary animal encounter into a friendship fantasy. But she talks about it like it's still happening, like she's still in contact with this thing. Children's imagination can be very powerful, especially when they're dealing with big changes like divorce. The forest creature may represent something she feels she's lost: safety, consistency, connection. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Has she mentioned wanting to return to the forest? Constantly. She begs me every day. That's concerning. We'll want to work on helping her understand the difference between imagination and reality, but therapy sessions didn't help. If anything, Emma's obsession with returning to the forest grew stronger. She started sleepwalking again, and twice I found her trying to pack a backpack in the middle of the night. I have to go back, Daddy, she said when I caught her the second time. He's calling for me. He needs me. Emma, listen to me. That thing is not your friend. It's dangerous. No, he's not. He's just lonely and sad. Like me when you and Mommy fight. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma's connection to this creature. Was it really about her own feelings of abandonment and isolation? Was she projecting her emotional needs onto something that had shown her attention? 3 weeks after our camping trip, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find Emma's bed empty. But this time, she wasn't in the house. I searched everywhere. Her room, the basement, the backyard, even the neighbor's property. She was simply gone. I called the police, called Rebecca, called everyone I could think of. But Emma had vanished without a trace. The police found her backpack 2 miles from our house, at the edge of Meridian Park. It contained clothes, snacks, and a hand-drawn map showing the route from our house to Olympic National Park. A 8-year-old's attempt to find her way back to the forest. The search teams scoured the park and the surrounding area for 3 days. They found no trace of Emma beyond that backpack. It was like she'd simply disappeared into thin air. On the 4th day, I drove back to our old campsite. I found her there, sitting on her princess throne log, arranging pine cones and stones exactly like she had on our trip. She looked up when she heard my truck and ran toward me with a huge smile. Daddy, you came back. I scooped her into my arms, relief and terror flooding through me in equal measure. Emma, are you okay? How did you get here? My friend brought me. He said you would come find me. She pointed toward the tree line, where a massive dark shape stood watching us. He was taking care of me until you got here. The creature stepped forward just enough for me to see it clearly. The same impossible thing from our camping trip. But somehow it seemed less threatening now. It looked at Emma with obvious affection, then at me with what I can only describe as understanding. He says goodbye now, Emma whispered. He knows I have to go home with you. The creature made that same mournful call I'd heard that night in the tent, but this time it sounded different. Not lonely, but grateful. It raised one massive hand in what looked like a wave, then turned and disappeared into the forest. Emma never spoke about the big hairy man again after that day. She stopped drawing pictures of creatures in the forest, stopped begging to go camping, and seemed to settle back into normal 8-year-old life. When I asked her what happened during those 4 days, she just said she'd been visiting a friend who needed her. Dr. Martinez thinks Emma had some kind of psychological break, that she wandered into the wilderness and survived by herself for 4 days, creating elaborate fantasies to cope with the trauma. The official report lists her disappearance as a case of a child getting lost while sleepwalking, but I know what I saw. I know that creature was real. And I know it had some kind of connection with my daughter that I'll never fully understand. More importantly, I know it could have kept her if it wanted to. Instead, it brought her back to me. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that thing really was dangerous, or if it was exactly what Emma said it was. A lonely creature that just wanted a friend. The rational part of my brain tells me that's impossible. Wild animals don't form emotional bonds with human children. They don't understand concepts like loneliness or friendship. They certainly don't return lost kids to their parents out of some sense of moral obligation. But then I remember those intelligent eyes, the way it communicated with Emma through her dreams, and how it could have taken her permanently but chose not to. Whatever that creature was, it showed more restraint and compassion than a lot of humans I've known. Emma's doing well now. She's adjusted to the custody arrangement, seems happy and healthy, and rarely mentions our camping trip anymore. Sometimes I catch her staring out windows toward the mountains, but that could just be normal childhood daydreaming. Rebecca thinks I made the whole thing up. Some kind of elaborate story to cover for the fact that I lost Emma during our trip. She's threatened to use it in court to limit my visitation rights, claiming I'm an unfit parent who can't keep our daughter safe. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am unfit. What kind of father takes his 8-year-old daughter into the wilderness and lets her get stalked by some unknown creature? What kind of man puts his child in that kind of danger for the sake of bonding time? But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. I don't think Emma was ever really in danger. That creature had multiple opportunities to take her, hurt her, or worse. Instead, it protected her during those 4 days she was missing, kept her safe and fed until I could find her. Whatever it was, it loved my daughter, and in its own way, it understood that she belonged with me. I haven't been camping since that trip. Haven't even driven past the turnoff for Olympic National Park. Some experiences change you so fundamentally that you can't go back to who you were before. I'm a different person now. More cautious, more aware of how little we really understand about the world around us. Emma's asked a few times if we can go camping again, but not to the same place. She wants to try somewhere new, somewhere without old friends that might complicate things. Smart kid. Sometimes I think she understands what happened better than I do. I've done research, of course. Read everything I can find about Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch encounters, cryptid behavior. Most of it's nonsense. Blurry photos, questionable testimonies, obvious hoaxes. But buried in all that garbage are a few accounts that ring true. Stories from people who encountered something in the wilderness that defied explanation. And in some of those stories, the creatures show intelligence, even kindness. They help lost hikers, return missing children, leave gifts for humans who show them respect. Maybe what we call monsters are just misunderstood beings trying to coexist in a world that's forgotten they exist. Or maybe I'm just trying to rationalize an experience that broke my understanding of reality. Maybe trauma makes us see meaning where there isn't any, create narratives that help us cope with things our minds can't process. I honestly don't know anymore. What I do know is that Emma is safe, happy, and whole. Whatever connection she formed with that creature in the forest, it didn't damage her. If anything, it seemed to give her a sense of peace she'd been missing since the divorce. She's more confident now, less anxious, like she learned something important about herself during those 4 missing days. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you don't need to understand everything that happens to you. You just need to accept it and move forward. But if you're planning a camping trip with your kids, especially somewhere remote and wild, pay attention to your instincts. Listen when the forest goes quiet. Watch for signs that you're not alone. And if your child starts talking about dreams involving new friends, maybe it's time to pack up and head home. Some connections are too powerful, too dangerous to explore. Some friendships cross boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. And some creatures are better left in the deep woods where they belong, no matter how lonely they might be. I learned that lesson the hard way. Emma and I both did, but we learned it together, and we both made it home. In the end, that's what matters most. Not the mystery we can't solve, not the creature we can't explain, but the fact that a father and daughter survived something extraordinary and came out stronger on the other side. If you've stuck with my story this far, you're probably wondering if I'd ever go back. If I'd try to find that creature again, maybe get some answers or closure. The honest answer, part of me wants to. Part of me needs to understand what really happened out there, what that thing wanted with my daughter and why it let her go. But the bigger part of me, the father part, knows that some doors should stay closed. Some mysteries are meant to protect us from truths we're not ready to handle, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the answers you think you need. Emma's safe. That's the only answer that really matters. Everything else can stay in the forest where it belongs. The thing that killed my clients and strung their bodies from the trees was no bear. It used their rifles as clubs and left them arranged like a warning. I'm Mike Sullivan, and I've been guiding hunting parties through the Colorado Rockies for 23 years. I know every trail, every watering hole, and every game route in a 100-square-mile area around my base camp. I've tracked wounded elk through blizzards, helped clients bag trophy bulls, and kept city folks alive in wilderness that would kill them without proper guidance. In all those years, I've seen plenty of dangerous situations. Grizzly encounters, mountain lion stalking, clients who thought they knew better than their guide and nearly got themselves killed. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to the Morrison hunting party last September. Some things in these mountains are older and more dangerous than anything you'll find in a hunting manual, and some hunts end with the hunter becoming the prey. The Morrison group booked me 6 months in advance for a premium elk hunt in the remote backcountry north of Grand Lake. 5 clients, all from Dallas, all wealthy businessmen who wanted the full wilderness experience without any of the actual work. They paid top dollar for the deluxe package: guide service, pack horses, wall tent camp, and guaranteed shots at trophy-class elk. Richard Morrison was the leader, CEO of some tech company, early 50s, the kind of guy who was used to getting his way through money and intimidation. His brother Frank was quieter but had the same entitled attitude. The other 3 were business associates: Johnson, Kelly, and a younger guy named Peters who seemed nervous about the whole expedition. "We want the real deal, Sullivan," Morrison told me during our planning meeting. "No tourist bullshit. We want to hunt like our grandfathers did. Deep wilderness, big game, and stories we can tell for the rest of our lives." I should have paid more attention to that last part. I've guided plenty of wealthy clients before, and most of them are decent people who just want an authentic experience. But the Morrison group had an edge that made me uncomfortable. They talked about killing like it was a business transaction, boasted about previous hunts where they'd taken animals that probably should have been left alone, and made jokes about teaching the wildlife who's boss. Still, their money was good, and I'd handled difficult clients before. How bad could 5 businessmen be in the wilderness? We rode out on a Monday morning in mid-September. Perfect hunting weather with the elk in full rut. I'd selected a remote area about 15 miles from the nearest road. Pristine wilderness where I'd guided successful hunts before. The terrain was challenging but manageable, and the elk population was healthy enough to support a group harvest. The first sign of trouble came on our second day. We were setting up camp in a meadow beside a stream when Johnson found the tree markings. Deep gouges in the bark of an ancient Engelmann spruce, running from about chest height up to 9 feet off the ground. The scratches were too regular to be from bear claws, too deep to be from elk antlers. "What made these?" Johnson asked, running his fingers along the gouges. I studied the markings carefully. In 23 years of guiding, I'd never seen anything like them. "Could be a grizzly," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "They sometimes mark territory on trees. Grizzlies haven't been confirmed in this area for decades," Peter said. He was the nervous one, but he'd done his homework on the local wildlife. Morrison laughed it off. "Whatever made them, we're here to hunt. If it's big enough to leave marks like that, it's big enough to put on my wall." That attitude, that assumption that everything in the wilderness existed for his entertainment, should have been my first warning that this group was going to be trouble. We found more markings over the next 2 days, not just tree scratches, but other signs that something large was moving through the area. Tracks in the soft earth beside the stream. Enormous footprints that looked almost human but were far too large and showed claw marks at the toe impressions. The elk were nervous too. We'd glassed them feeding in distant meadows, but any approach closer than 300 yards would send them bolting in obvious panic. Not normal wariness. Genuine terror. Something's got them spooked, I told Morrison as we watched another herd flee from our position. Might be predator pressure from wolves or cats. Then we'll hunt the predators too, Morrison replied. Johnson's got tags for pretty much everything in Colorado, but it wasn't hunting season for whatever was making those tracks, and hunting season might not matter anyway. On our fourth day, we made contact. I was leading the group along a game trail when Kelly suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed toward a stand of aspen trees about 100 yards ahead. Something was moving among the white trunks. Something large and dark that seemed to be keeping pace with our group. There, Kelly whispered. Something's following us. I glassed the area with my binoculars but couldn't get a clear view through the aspens. Whatever was there kept to the shadows, moving with purpose but staying just out of sight. Probably elk, I said, though I knew it wasn't. Elk don't stalk hunting parties. Morrison was getting excited. If it's tracking us, it's curious. That means we can get close enough for a shot. Mr. Morrison, we don't shoot at targets we can't identify. Basic hunting safety. But Morrison was already shouldering his rifle. A high-end custom job in .300 Winchester Magnum. I can see it moving. That's enough identification for me. Alright, put the rifle down, I said firmly. You're not taking a shot at an unknown target in my hunting area. But Morrison ignored me, tracking something through his scope. I've got movement. It's big. Definitely not elk. The shot echoed through the mountains like thunder. Birds exploded from the trees, and every sound in the forest died instantly. Morrison lowered his rifle with a satisfied grin. Got him. Clean shot. I grabbed my binoculars and glassed the area where he'd fired. Nothing. No blood. No downed animal. No sign of a hit. I don't see anything down, Morrison. Trust me. I hit it. Let's go collect our trophy. Against my better judgment, I led the group toward the aspen stand. What we found there changed everything. The trees showed fresh damage. The bark stripped away in long gouges. Branches snapped off at impossible heights. But there was no blood. No body. No sign that Morrison had hit anything except timber. What we did find were footprints. Massive impressions in the soft earth, showing clearly that something enormous had been standing exactly where Morrison aimed. The prints showed a humanoid foot structure but were easily 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. Jesus Christ, Peters whispered, kneeling beside one of the tracks. What kind of animal makes prints like this? I was studying the depth of the impressions, trying to estimate the weight of whatever made them. Something that weighs at least 600 pounds and walks upright. Grizzly bear, Morrison said confidently, standing on its hind legs when I took the shot. But these weren't bear tracks. I'd seen thousands of bear prints in my career, and this was something entirely different. The foot structure, the toe positioning, the depth pattern. This was from a bipedal creature that walked upright as its primary means of locomotion. Frank Morrison was examining the tree damage. Mike, look at this. These gouges go up at least 10 feet. What bear can reach that high? I didn't have an answer. But I was starting to get a very bad feeling about what we might be dealing with. That night, we doubled our perimeter watch and kept the fire burning bright. Something was moving around our camp in the darkness. We could hear it circling us, just beyond the firelight's reach. Heavy footfalls, snapping branches, and occasionally a low, rumbling sound that was almost like speech but not quite human. It's tracking us, Johnson said, clutching his rifle. Whatever Morrison shot at, It's following us. Animals don't track hunting parties for revenge, I told him, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The sounds continued until dawn, always staying just outside our vision but close enough that we knew we were being watched. None of us slept much. The next morning brought the first direct confrontation. We were breaking camp when Peter spotted something watching us from a rocky outcrop about 200 yards away. This time, we all got a clear look. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with shoulders that seemed impossibly broad. But it was the face that stopped my heart. Partially human but wrong somehow, with intelligent eyes that were clearly studying our group with obvious intent. "That's no bear," Frank Morrison breathed. His brother Richard was already raising his rifle. "I don't care what it is. It's been stalking us, and now I'm going to finish what I started." "Don't shoot!" I grabbed for his rifle, but Morrison pushed me away. "Get off me, Sullivan. I paid for this hunt, and I'm taking my trophy." The creature on the outcrop seemed to understand what was happening. It straightened to its full height, easily 9 feet tall, and let out a roar that echoed off the canyon walls like nothing I'd ever heard. The sound was part animal rage and part something else, something that sounded almost like a warning. Morrison fired anyway. The bullet struck the rocks near the creature's feet, sending up a spray of stone fragments. The thing didn't flee like any normal animal would have. Instead, it stared directly at Morrison for a long moment, then turned and disappeared behind the rocks. "Missed." Morrison cursed, working the bolt on his rifle. "But I've got its range now. Mr. Morrison, I strongly recommend we pack up and head back to the trailhead. This situation is escalating beyond normal hunting parameters. Like hell. That thing's been playing games with us for 2 days. Time to show it who's in charge." But we weren't in charge. We weren't even close to being in charge. The attack started that afternoon. We were riding single file along a narrow trail when something massive crashed through the trees ahead of us. The pack horses spooked and bolted, scattering our supplies across the mountainside. In the chaos, I got my first close look at what we were dealing with. The creature was even larger than it had appeared from a distance. Easily 9 feet tall and built like a linebacker, covered in thick dark hair that hung in matted clumps. Its arms were disproportionately long, reaching nearly to its knees, and ended in hands that looked capable of crushing bone. But it was the intelligence in its eyes that terrified me most. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was a thinking being that had decided we were a threat that needed to be eliminated. It grabbed Johnson's horse by the bridle and simply lifted the entire animal off the ground. The horse screamed in terror as the creature threw it sideways into a stand of pine trees. Johnson was thrown clear, but his rifle went flying into the brush. "Shoot it!" Morrison yelled, fighting to control his panicked horse. "Everybody shoot!" The gunfire was deafening in the confined space of the trail. 5 rifles firing at once, muzzle flashes strobing like lightning. But the creature moved with impossible speed, using the trees for cover and somehow avoiding the hail of bullets. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest like a shadow. Johnson was unconscious with a concussion. His horse was dead, and half our supplies were scattered across a 1/4 mile of mountainside. We'd fired over 30 rounds and hadn't hit our target once. "We need to get out of here," I told Morrison. "This thing is hunting us now, and we're not equipped for this kind of fight." "Bullshit. It's just an animal. Animals can be killed." "Mr. Morrison, that was no ordinary animal. It showed tactical thinking, used cover effectively, and demonstrated strength that's beyond anything in these mountains. I don't care if it's King Kong. I came here to hunt, and I'm not leaving empty-handed. That was our last mistake. We should have abandoned everything and hiked out immediately. Instead, Morrison insisted on making camp and setting a trap for our stalker. The trap was his idea. They used Johnson as bait, while the rest of us took up positions in the surrounding trees. Johnson was still groggy from his concussion, but Morrison convinced him that staying together was our best defense. It wants us isolated, Morrison explained. So we'll give it what it wants, but we'll be ready for it. I tried to talk them out of it, but Morrison was the client, and his money was paying for this expedition. Against my better judgment, I went along with the plan. We never saw it coming. The attack happened just after sunset, when the shadows were deep enough to provide perfect cover. I was positioned about 50 yards from camp when I heard Johnson's scream. Not a shout of alarm, but a scream of absolute terror. By the time I reached the camp, it was over. Johnson was gone. His rifle lay on the ground, bent nearly in half like someone had used it as a crowbar. There were massive footprints everywhere, and the smell, that musky, earthy odor that seemed to cling to everything the creature touched. Where is he? Frank Morrison was spinning in circles, rifle ready, eyes wild with panic. It took him, Peters whispered. Jesus Christ, it took him. We found Johnson 20 minutes later, about a quarter mile from camp. He was hanging from a tall pine tree, suspended nearly 30 feet off the ground. His body was broken in ways that suggested incredible strength. Bones snapped like twigs, skull crushed like an eggshell, but it was the arrangement that made my blood freeze. Johnson hadn't just been killed and dumped. He'd been deliberately positioned, displayed like a hunting trophy, like a message. We're getting out of here right now, I announced. Pack the essentials and leave everything else. No way, Morrison said, though his voice was shaking. That thing killed Johnson. Now it's personal. Mr. Morrison, we're dealing with something that's bigger, stronger, and smarter than us. It's hunting us systematically, and we can't fight it on its own territory. I don't run from animals. But Peters was already packing his gear. Screw this. I'm hiking out tonight. With or without the rest of you. Kelly joined him. Mike's right. This isn't hunting anymore. We're the prey. That left the Morrison brothers and me. Richard Morrison was still convinced he could kill the creature with enough firepower. Frank was starting to see reason but wouldn't abandon his brother. Give me until morning, Richard Morrison pleaded. One more chance to track this thing down and finish it. I should have said no. Should have forced the entire group to evacuate immediately. But Morrison was paying me to guide a hunt, and technically, that's what he wanted to continue doing. First light, I agreed. If we don't find it by noon, we're hiking out. I spent that night awake, listening to the forest sounds and wondering what we'd gotten ourselves into. Something was moving around our perimeter, just beyond the firelight. I could hear it breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths that sounded almost like laughter. When morning came, we found Peters and Kelly. They tried to hike out during the night, despite my warnings about traveling in darkness. We found them about 2 miles down the trail, hung from trees just like Johnson. But this display was even more elaborate. Their bodies arranged in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic, and their rifles were missing. It's collecting our weapons, I realized with growing horror. Learning about our technology, Frank Morrison was staring at Kelly's body, his face pale with shock. Richard, we need to leave. Now. But Richard Morrison was beyond reason. The deaths of his friends had pushed him into a state of rage that made him dangerous to everyone around him. No. That thing wants a war? I'll give it a war. He pulled out a satellite phone I didn't know he'd brought. I'm calling for backup. Military contractors, heavy weapons, whatever it takes. I grabbed the phone from his hands. You can't bring a small army into a national forest, and you can't start a war with something we don't understand. Watch me. That's when it attacked again. The creature came out of the morning mist like something from a nightmare, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 more shapes emerged from the forest, smaller than our primary stalker but still enormous by human standards. A family group, I realized. We hadn't just been hunting one creature, we'd been threatening an entire population. The lead creature, our original stalker, was carrying something in its massive hands. As it got closer, I could see what it was. Peter's rifle, cleaned and maintained, held like the creature understood exactly what it was for. Holy shit, Frank Morrison breathed. It's armed. The creature raised the rifle with obvious familiarity, pointing it directly at Richard Morrison. For a moment, the two apex predators stared at each other across 30 yards of meadow. The human hunter and something that might have been hunting humans since before recorded history. Morrison broke first, bringing up his own rifle and firing rapidly. But the creature was already moving, using Peters' weapon with deadly accuracy. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains as the two groups engaged in the strangest battle I've ever witnessed. Humans with high-powered rifles against creatures using our own weapons against us. It was over in less than 2 minutes. Richard Morrison went down first, taken by a perfect shot from his own hunting companion's rifle. Frank tried to run but didn't make it 50 yards before one of the smaller creatures brought him down with Johnson's bent weapon, using it like a club. I was left alone, surrounded by 4 creatures that had systematically eliminated my entire hunting party using their own equipment against them. The lead creature approached me slowly, still carrying Peter's rifle but not pointing it in my direction. It stopped about 10 feet away and studied me with those intelligent eyes. Then it did something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It pointed to the bodies of my clients, then to itself, then back to me. The message was clear. It was showing me what happened to hunters who became threats. But it was also giving me a choice. I dropped my rifle and backed away slowly, hands raised in surrender. The creature watched me for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the forest with its family group, taking the collected weapons with them. I hiked out alone, carrying nothing but my basic survival gear and the most incredible story that nobody would ever believe. The official report listed it as a hunting accident. Clients who separated from their guide and fell victim to difficult terrain and wildlife encounters. The missing bodies were attributed to scavenger activity in the remote location. I never guided another hunting party into that area. Hell, I barely guide hunting parties anywhere anymore. The Morrison incident ended my career as surely as if I'd been shot myself. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those creatures and what they represent. Intelligence that predates human civilization, territorial instincts that make our wars look like playground squabbles, and the ability to adapt our own technology against us. We thought we were the apex predators in those mountains. We learned otherwise. The Morrison brothers came to Colorado to hunt trophy animals and prove their dominance over the wilderness. Instead, they became trophies themselves, displayed as warnings to other hunters who might forget that some territories belong to creatures that have never accepted human authority. If you're planning a hunting trip in remote wilderness areas, remember that you're entering someone else's home, someone who's been there longer than your species has existed, someone who understands the rules of survival better than any human ever will. And if you see signs of intelligence in places where intelligence shouldn't exist, massive footprints, deliberate tree markings, evidence that something is watching and learning, maybe it's time to pack up and leave. Some hunts aren't worth the trophy. Some territories are better left to their original owners. The mountains keep their secrets for a reason. Sometimes those secrets are older, stronger, and more dangerous than anything humans are prepared to face. I learned that lesson the hard way, watching my clients get turned into hunting trophies by something that understood warfare better than they did. Trust me, you don't want to learn it the same way. The 9-foot-tall creature standing over our shredded research equipment had Dr. Peterson's field notebook in its massive clawed hand, and it was reading it. My name is Alex Chen, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a graduate student in wildlife biology at the University of Montana. I thought the hardest part of my research would be spending 3 months in the remote Glacier National Park backcountry, studying elk migration patterns for my thesis. Turns out the hardest part was surviving long enough to tell anyone what we discovered out there. Let me start from the beginning, before everything went to hell. I'd been working with Dr. Sarah Peterson for 2 years, and when she offered me a spot on her summer research team, I jumped at the chance. Peterson was a legend in wildlife biology, 45 years old, 20 years of field experience, and a reputation for pushing the boundaries of animal behavior research. Working with her was like getting a master class from one of the best. The project seemed straightforward enough. We'd establish a research station at the remote northern edge of Glacier National Park, track elk herds with GPS collars and camera traps, and document their movement patterns during summer migration. 3 months of data collection that would form the backbone of my graduate thesis. Our team was small but experienced. Besides Peterson and myself, we had Tom Bradley, a field technician with 15 years of wilderness experience, and Jennifer Walsh, a PhD candidate from Oregon State who specialized in animal behavior analysis. 4 researchers, state-of-the-art equipment, and enough supplies to last us through August. What could go wrong? We hiked into the study area in early June, loaded down with equipment and supplies. The research station was basically a glorified base camp. 3 weather-resistant tents, a central area for equipment and food storage, and a perimeter of motion-activated cameras to monitor animal activity around our site. The location was perfect for our research. A natural clearing beside a stream, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, and opening onto a meadow where elk frequently grazed. Remote enough that human activity wouldn't interfere with animal behavior, but accessible enough for us to hike out if necessary. Peterson had done preliminary work in the area the previous summer and reported excellent elk activity. She'd also mentioned some unusual animal signs that didn't match known species in the region, but attributed them to wolves or possibly bears migrating from further north. I should have asked more questions about those unusual signs. Our first week went exactly according to plan. We set up a grid of camera traps covering a 5-square-mile area, captured and collared 12 elk with GPS tracking devices, and established baseline behavior patterns for the local herd. The weather was perfect, the equipment worked flawlessly, and our data collection was ahead of schedule. Jennifer was particularly excited about some of the behaviors she was documenting. "These elk are showing avoidance patterns I've never seen before," she told us one evening as we reviewed the day's footage. "Look at this." She pulled up video from one of our cameras, showing a group of elk grazing peacefully in a meadow. Suddenly, all their heads snapped up simultaneously, ears forward, bodies tense. They stood frozen for about 30 seconds, then bolted as a group toward the tree line. "What spooked them?" Tom asked, leaning over Jennifer's shoulder. "That's the weird part. I've watched this footage a dozen times, and there's no obvious trigger, no predator, no unusual sounds, no visible threat. They just panicked." Peterson frowned at the screen. "Could be scent they picked up. Wolves, bears, mountain lions, all capable of triggering that kind of response." "Maybe," Jennifer said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Except we've got similar footage from 6 different cameras over the past 3 days. Always the same pattern: peaceful grazing, sudden alertness, then panicked flight." I found myself studying the tree line in the background of the footage, looking for any sign of movement. There, just at the edge of the frame, was that a shadow shifting between the trees. I rewound the video and watched again, but couldn't be sure. "Could be territorial displacement," I suggested. "Maybe there's a large predator in the area that's pushing the elk out of their normal patterns." "That's what I'm thinking," Peterson agreed. "We'll need to expand our camera grid, maybe set up some bait stations to see what kind of predators we're dealing with." Looking back, I realized that was our first mistake. We thought we were studying the elk, but something else was studying us. The sign started small. Equipment moved overnight. Cameras repositioned slightly. GPS units found 20 feet from where we'd left them. Field notes scattered by what we assumed was wind. Tom blamed it on bears investigating our camp. Black bears are curious as hell, he explained, collecting our scattered data sheets. They'll get into anything that smells interesting. We need to bear-proof our equipment storage better, but bears don't typically leave perfectly clear handprints on equipment cases. Handprints that were nearly twice the size of a human hand. Peterson discovered the first set of prints on a camera housing that had been moved during the night. Tom, have you ever seen bear prints this clear? These look almost human. Jennifer finished, kneeling beside the camera, except way too big. The print, pressed into the soft earth around the camera, was unmistakably a hand. 5 distinct fingers, opposable thumb, even what looked like fingerprint ridges in the mud. But the scale was all wrong. The palm alone was larger than my entire hand. Could be a hoax, Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. Someone messing with us, trying to scare the city researchers. Out here? Peterson gestured toward the surrounding wilderness. We're 40 miles from the nearest road. Who's going to hike all the way out here just to play pranks? That night, we set up motion-activated floodlights around our camp perimeter. If something was investigating our site, we wanted to know what it was. We got our answer at 2:47 a.m. I was jolted awake by the sudden blaze of floodlights outside my tent, followed by Jennifer's screaming. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled outside to find her standing frozen in the middle of our camp, staring at something just beyond the light. Jennifer! What is it? She pointed with a shaking hand toward the edge of our clearing. There. There was something watching us. Something huge. Tom and Peterson emerged from their tents, both carrying flashlights and scanning the perimeter. The floodlights had triggered automatically but were now cycling off, leaving us in relative darkness again. What did you see? Peterson asked, her voice steady but alert. I got up to use the bathroom, Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. When I came out of my tent, it was just standing there, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair. It was watching our camp. A bear, Tom said immediately. Had to be a bear standing on its hind legs. Bears don't stand perfectly upright for extended periods, Jennifer shot back. And bears don't have shoulders that broad or arms that long. I swept my flashlight beam across the tree line where Jennifer was pointing. Nothing moved, but I could swear I felt something watching us from the darkness. Did it seem aggressive? Peterson asked. No, just curious, like it was studying us. Jennifer hugged herself against the cold. When the lights came on, it just stepped backward into the trees. Didn't run, didn't panic, just withdrew. We spent the next hour searching the perimeter with flashlights, looking for tracks or any other evidence. We found plenty. Large footprints in the soft earth, pressed deep enough to indicate something weighing several 100 pounds. The stride length was enormous, and the foot shape was distinctly humanoid but wrong somehow. These aren't bear tracks, Tom admitted, crouching beside one of the clearer prints. I've been tracking animals for 15 years and I've never seen anything like this. Peterson was taking photographs and measurements, her scientific training overriding whatever fear she might have felt. 18 inches long, 7 inches wide at the heel, 5 distinct toes with what appeared to be nail or claw marks. Definitely bipedal locomotion based on the gait pattern. So what are we dealing with? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Peterson looked up from her camera. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's intelligent, curious about our presence, and large enough to be potentially dangerous. Should we radio for evacuation? Jennifer asked. And tell them what? That we saw a big animal we couldn't identify? Peterson shook her head. We need more data before we make any decisions. That was our second mistake. Over the next few days, the encounters escalated. Our nocturnal visitor became bolder, approaching closer to camp and showing less concern about being detected. We'd find clear evidence of its presence every morning. Footprints circling our tents, equipment examined and carefully replaced, even what looked like deliberate arrangements of sticks and stones near our camp perimeter. Jennifer started documenting everything, turning our elk behavior study into an impromptu cryptozoology investigation. Look at this pattern, she said, showing us photographs of stick arrangements she'd found. These aren't random. Something is deliberately creating geometric patterns. The stick formations were undeniably artificial. Straight lines, perfect triangles, even what looked like arrows pointing toward specific areas of our camp. Whatever was creating them understood basic geometry and had the dexterity to manipulate objects with precision. It's trying to communicate, Jennifer theorized. These patterns are too complex to be coincidental. Tom was getting increasingly nervous. Maybe we should pack up and head out. This thing, whatever it is, it's getting too comfortable around us. But Peterson was fascinated rather than frightened. This could be the discovery of a lifetime. An unknown primate species in North America, showing advanced cognitive behavior. We can't abandon this. That's when the equipment started disappearing. Not damaged or scattered like before, but completely removed from our camp. A GPS unit vanished overnight, followed by a camera, then our backup radio. Each disappearance was surgically precise. The missing item was carefully extracted without disturbing anything around it. It's studying our technology, Peterson realized, taking samples to examine elsewhere, or disabling our communication equipment. Tom pointed out grimly. We're down to one radio, and if that disappears, we were 40 miles from the nearest road, in terrain that would take at least 2 days to traverse on foot. Without radio communication, we'd be completely cut off from the outside world. That night, we took turns standing watch. I drew the midnight to 4 a.m. shift, armed with a flashlight, our remaining radio, and a flare gun we'd brought for emergencies. The idea was to document any approach by our mysterious visitor while maintaining safe distance. I saw it at 1:37 a.m. It emerged from the tree line like a shadow given form, impossibly tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Even from a distance of about 50 yards, its size was overwhelming. The shoulders were broader than any human's. The arms hung nearly to its knees, and it moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. But it wasn't alone. 2 smaller figures followed behind it, similar in appearance but maybe 6 feet tall instead of 8 or 9. A family group, I realized with shock. We weren't dealing with a single creature. We were in the territory of an entire population. I watched them approach our camp, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it. The large one, the adult, moved directly to our equipment storage area while the smaller ones hung back, watching. It began examining our remaining gear with obvious intelligence, picking up items, turning them over in its massive hands, even opening cases to look inside. Not destructive, but thorough, like a scientist studying alien artifacts. That's when I realized it was specifically looking for something. The creature moved through our equipment with purpose, ignoring most items but focusing on our documentation, field notebooks, data sheets, camera memory cards. It found Peterson's primary research journal and sat down cross-legged to examine it. I watched in amazement as it carefully turned pages, studying Peterson's handwriting and diagrams with obvious comprehension. It wasn't just looking at the book. It was reading it. I must have made some sound, a gasp or an involuntary movement. because suddenly all three creatures' heads snapped toward my position. In the moonlight, I could see their eyes reflecting like an animal's, but there was intelligence there that was distinctly human-like. The adult stood slowly, still holding Peterson's journal, and began walking directly toward me. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place by fear and fascination. The creature approached to within 20 feet, then stopped and studied me with obvious curiosity. It was close enough that I could smell it. A musky, earthy odor like wet leaves and rich soil. Then it did something that shattered my understanding of what I was witnessing. It pointed to itself, then to the journal, then to me. The gesture was unmistakably communicative. It was trying to tell me something about the research we were conducting. I found my voice somehow. You understand what we're doing here. The creature tilted its head, listening to my words with obvious attention. Then it opened Peterson's journal to a specific page, one of our elk behavior charts, and pointed to several data points before looking back at me. It was showing me our own research, highlighting specific information. But why? The creature stepped closer, and I could see its face clearly in the moonlight. The features were partially human but distorted. A pronounced brow ridge, a broad flat nose, and a mouth that seemed too large. But the eyes were disturbingly intelligent and filled with what I could only describe as concern. It turned the journal toward me again, this time pointing to our maps of the research area. Specifically, it was indicating the locations where we documented the elk's panicked behavior. The areas where the herds had suddenly fled for no apparent reason. Understanding hit me like a physical blow. The elk weren't being spooked by random predators. They were fleeing from these creatures. And these creatures were trying to tell us something about it. The adult looked directly into my eyes and made a low, rumbling sound that was almost like speech. Not words I could understand, but clearly an attempt at communication. Then it carefully placed Peterson's journal on the ground between us and stepped back. It pointed to the journal, then to the forest around us, then made a sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass our entire camp. The message was clear. It wanted us to understand something about this place, about our research, about what we'd gotten ourselves into. Then all three creatures turned and melted back into the forest, leaving me alone with Peterson's journal and the dawning realization that we weren't just studying animal behavior. We were the ones being studied. I woke Peterson immediately and told her everything. She listened with growing excitement rather than fear, her scientific curiosity overriding any sense of danger. Intelligent tool use, symbolic communication, social structure. Alex, we're looking at a species that could fundamentally change our understanding of primate evolution. Dr. Peterson, I think they're trying to warn us about something. The way it showed me those elk behavior maps, territorial boundaries, she said immediately. They're telling us we're in their territory, that our presence is disrupting the local ecosystem, but that wasn't quite right either. The creature's expression had been concerned, almost urgent. Not territorial. Protective. I think there's something else in these woods. Something that has both the elk and these creatures on edge. Peterson was already getting dressed. We need to document this properly. Set up cameras focused on the communication attempts, rather than just perimeter security. Dr. Peterson, maybe we should consider leaving, if we're disrupting their territory. Alex, this is the discovery of the century. We can't walk away now. Looking back, I realized that was our final mistake. We were so focused on what we were discovering that we forgot to ask why they were trying to communicate with us in the first place. What were they trying to warn us about? The next morning brought our answer, and it wasn't what any of us expected. We woke to find our entire camp surrounded by the stick and stone formations Jennifer had been documenting. But these weren't the simple geometric patterns we'd seen before. These were complex structures that looked almost like warning markers or boundaries. More disturbing, we found fresh tracks everywhere. not just from our regular visitors, but from something else entirely. These new tracks were similar in size but showed different characteristics. Longer claws, a more aggressive gait pattern, and what looked like deliberate damage to vegetation along the trail. 2 different species, Peterson realized, studying the track patterns, or at least 2 very different behavioral groups. Tom found the first real evidence of what our mysterious visitors had been trying to warn us about. 100 yards from our camp, he discovered what remained of an elk that had been killed sometime during the night. But this wasn't a normal predation. The carcass had been torn apart with savage efficiency, and the kill site showed signs of a struggle far more violent than anything a bear or mountain lion would produce. Whatever did this is big, strong, and aggressive as hell, Tom said, studying the claw marks on nearby trees. Look at these gouges. They go 8 feet up the trunk, but it was Peterson who made the most disturbing discovery. The positioning is wrong, she said, examining the elk remains. This wasn't killed for food. Most of the meat is still here. This was killed as a display, a territorial marker. She pointed to how the remains had been arranged, spread out in a pattern that was clearly artificial, positioned to be visible from multiple directions, like a warning sign written in blood and bone. Something's moving into the area, Peterson continued. Something aggressive and territorial, and I think our original visitors have been trying to tell us to leave before we encounter it. That night, we kept a constant watch. All 4 of us stayed awake, monitoring our perimeter with every piece of equipment we had left. The floodlights remained on constantly, and we kept our emergency flares within easy reach. They came at 3 a.m., not our original visitors. Something else entirely. The motion sensors triggered first, followed immediately by the most terrifying sound I've ever heard, a roar that seemed to combine the worst elements of a grizzly bear and a human scream. The floodlights revealed 3 massive shapes approaching through the trees, similar to our original visitors but larger, more aggressive looking, and moving with obvious hostile intent. These weren't curious observers. These were predators. "Everyone stay together," Peterson shouted over the roaring. "Don't run. That'll trigger a chase response." But it was too late for rational behavior. The lead creature, easily 9 feet tall and built like a nightmare version of our previous visitors, charged directly at our camp with shocking speed. That's when our original visitors arrived. They emerged from the opposite tree line like defenders responding to an invasion. The family group I'd observed the night before, plus several others I hadn't seen. The adult I'd communicated with positioned itself directly between us and the attacking creatures. What followed was unlike anything in nature documentaries. The 2 groups clashed with brutal efficiency, and it quickly became clear that this was a territorial dispute that had been building for some time. Our presence hadn't caused this conflict. We'd just been caught in the middle of it. The defending group was smaller but more coordinated, working together to drive off the attackers. The battle was brief but savage, ending when the attacking creatures retreated back into the forest with several of their group clearly injured. In the sudden silence that followed, our defender, the creature that had tried to communicate with me, turned toward our camp. It was bleeding from several claw marks but didn't seem seriously injured. It looked directly at me and made the same pointing gesture from the night before. Journal, forest, camp. But this time, the meaning was unmistakable. Leave. Now. Before they come back, we packed everything we could carry and started hiking out at first light, leaving behind thousands of dollars of equipment and 3 months' worth of research data. But we were alive, and that was more than we might have been able to say if we'd stayed another night. The hike out took 18 hours of hard travel, during which we barely spoke. What was there to say? We'd stumbled into a territorial war between unknown species, survived because one group chose to protect us, and learned that everything we thought we knew about North American wildlife was incomplete. Peterson tried to convince the university to fund a follow-up expedition with proper security and military support. The administration politely declined, suggesting she focus on more traditional research topics for the remainder of her career. Jennifer changed her doctoral focus to domestic animal behavior and refuses to discuss our summer research. Tom quit field biology entirely and now works for the Forest Service, filing paperwork in an office in Missoula. As for me, I transferred to marine biology and moved to the coast. Something about being near the ocean feels safer now. The deep woods, those shadows between the trees, they hold too many secrets for my comfort. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about our defenders. Are they still out there, protecting their territory from the more aggressive groups? Did our presence somehow make their situation worse by drawing unwanted attention to the area? And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd understood their warning sooner. What if we'd packed up and left after that first communication attempt? Would the territorial conflict have escalated anyway? Or did our research somehow trigger the invasion? I'll never know. But I do know this. There are things in the wilderness that science hasn't cataloged yet. Things that are intelligent, social, and capable of both protection and violence depending on the circumstances. Our research was supposed to study elk behavior, but we ended up documenting something far more significant and far more dangerous. We learned that humans aren't the only intelligent species capable of war, territory disputes, and moral choices. We learned that sometimes the monsters are the ones trying to save you from the real monsters. And we learned that some discoveries are too dangerous to share with the world, no matter how revolutionary they might be. The official report lists our research as inconclusive due to equipment failure and adverse weather conditions. All our documentation of the creature encounters was classified as anecdotal observations requiring further verification. But if you're planning field research in remote wilderness areas, especially in the Pacific Northwest, pay attention to the signs that something's watching you. Listen when the local wildlife suddenly changes its behavior patterns. And if you find evidence of intelligence in places where intelligence shouldn't exist, maybe it's time to pack up and leave. Some territories belong to their original inhabitants, no matter what our maps and land grants might say. Some discoveries are meant to stay hidden, and some warnings should be heeded, even when they come from sources we don't understand. I learned that lesson in the mountains of Montana, surrounded by creatures that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we're ready to accept. I just hope I learned it in time to save the rest of my team, because the real tragedy would be if our curiosity cost us more than just our research. If it cost us our humanity's place in a world that's wilder and more dangerous than we ever imagined. The forest keeps its secrets for a reason. Sometimes it's better not to know what's watching you from the shadows. Trust me on that one. The 8-foot-tall creature climbing my fire tower had human scalps woven into its matted fur, and my radio was already dead. I'm Connor Walsh, and until 3 weeks ago, I had the best job in Idaho. Fire lookout for the Clearwater National Forest, spending my summers in a tower 70 feet above the tree line, watching for smoke and enjoying the kind of solitude most people never experience. It's honest work that pays decent money and lets you think about life without the constant noise of civilization. I've worked fire towers for 8 seasons now, different locations across the Northwest. The isolation doesn't bother me. Actually, it's the main attraction. Up here, it's just you, the forest, and endless sky. The kind of peace you can't find anywhere else. At least, that's what I thought before I learned what else lives up here in the deep timber. Tower 12 sits on the highest peak in a 50-mile radius, commanding views of wilderness that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The nearest road is 12 miles of hiking trail, and the nearest occupied building is 40 miles away. When I take this assignment each summer, I'm as isolated as it's possible to be in the modern world. The tower itself is a classic design. Steel framework supporting a 10 by 10 cabin with wraparound windows, built in 1962 and maintained just enough to keep it functional. Solar panels power the radio equipment and basic lights. A propane tank handles cooking and heat, and a cistern collects rainwater for drinking. Everything I need to spend 5 months watching for wildfires and enjoying the solitude. I hiked up to Tower 12 on June 1st, loaded down with a summer's worth of supplies and looking forward to another season of peaceful observation. The trail was in good condition, the weather was perfect, and I felt that familiar sense of coming home as the tower came into view through the trees. The first sign that something was different this year came when I was unpacking my gear. Previous lookouts traditionally leave notes for their replacements. Observations about local wildlife, trail conditions, equipment quirks, that sort of thing. Informal intelligence passed down from one fire watcher to the next. The note from last year's lookout, a guy named Rodriguez, was different. Connor, watch the tree line after dark. Something's been circling the tower at night. Big, bipedal, intelligent. Disabled my radio twice. Couldn't get clear photos but left scratch marks on the tower legs. Stay alert. Rodriguez. I'd worked with Rodriguez on another tower 3 years back. Solid guy. Not prone to paranoia or tall tales. If he said something was circling the tower, something was circling the tower. I found the scratch marks he mentioned on the steel support legs about 20 feet up from the ground. Deep gouges in the metal that would have required incredible strength to create. The pattern suggested claws, but the spacing was all wrong for any animal I knew. Still, I'd been doing this job long enough to know that wilderness areas are full of things that don't fit the textbook descriptions. Oversized bears, mountain lions with unusual behavior patterns, even the occasional wolf pack that had wandered down from Canada. I made a mental note to keep my camera handy and started settling into the routine of tower life. The first 2 weeks were completely normal. I'd wake at dawn, check the weather instruments, scan the forest for smoke, file my daily report with the district office, and spend the rest of the day reading, maintaining equipment, or just enjoying the view. The forest below was healthy and vibrant. Elk herds moving through the meadows, bear activity around the seasonal berry patches, and the occasional deer picking their way along the ridgelines. Normal wildlife behavior in a pristine ecosystem. But at night, I started noticing things. It began with sounds. Heavy footfall circling the tower base, always staying just beyond the range of my spotlights. At first, I assumed it was a curious bear investigating the human presence. Bears are notorious for exploring anything that smells interesting, and a fire tower probably carried all kinds of appealing scents. The footfalls continued for several nights, always following the same pattern. Approach from the west side around 10 p.m., circle the tower clockwise 3 times, then retreat back into the forest. Methodical, almost ritualistic behavior that didn't match normal bear activity. On my 15th night, I got my first clear look at what was making the sounds. I was doing routine equipment checks when movement below caught my eye. Something large was emerging from the tree line, walking upright on 2 legs, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the figure. The details were unmistakable. Broad shoulders, disproportionately long arms, and a face that was partially human but wrong somehow. It moved with obvious intelligence, studying the tower structure like it was planning something. Most disturbing, it was carrying what looked like tools, long poles that it used to probe the ground around the tower base, testing the guy wires and support cables with obvious understanding of their function. The creature completed its usual 3 circles, then stopped directly below my position and looked up. Even from 70 feet above, I could see its eyes reflecting the cabin lights. We stared at each other for a long moment. The human fire watcher and something that definitely wasn't supposed to exist. Then it melted back into the forest without a sound. I tried radioing the district office immediately, but my radio was dead. Complete equipment failure with no obvious cause. The power systems were functioning normally, but the radio unit wouldn't transmit or receive. I spent the next day troubleshooting the radio system, checking connections and testing components. Everything appeared normal, but the unit remained completely non-functional. It was like something had selectively disabled just the communication equipment while leaving everything else operational. The second radio failure happened 3 days later. I'd hiked down to the supply cache at the 6-mile marker and retrieved my backup radio unit, a handheld that I'd tested before bringing it up the tower. The unit worked perfectly until I tried to make contact with the district office. The moment I keyed the microphone, the radio emitted a burst of static and went dead. Permanent equipment failure, just like the main unit. Someone, or something, was systematically cutting off my communication with the outside world. That night, the creature returned, but this time, it wasn't alone. I counted at least 4 figures moving through the trees below, similar in size and structure, but showing subtle differences that suggested different individuals. They approached the tower in formation, spreading out to surround the base before beginning their investigation. What followed was clearly a coordinated reconnaissance mission. The creatures examined every aspect of the tower structure: support cables, anchor points, access ladders, even the propane tank and solar panel arrays. They were learning about human engineering, understanding how the tower was built and how it could be compromised. Most terrifying, they were clearly planning something. I watched them for over an hour, documenting their behavior and trying to understand their intentions. The creatures showed obvious intelligence and coordination, communication through gestures and low vocalizations, division of labor in their examination of the tower, and what appeared to be a command structure with one individual directing the others' activities. When they finally retreated into the forest, I knew I was in serious trouble. These weren't just curious animals investigating human presence. They were conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence for some kind of coordinated action, and with my radios disabled, I had no way to call for help. I started preparing for a siege. Over the next 2 days, I inventoried my supplies, secured the cabin against potential intrusion, and developed contingency plans for different scenarios. The tower was designed to be defensible. The only access was via a 70-foot ladder, and the cabin itself was built to withstand severe weather. But it wasn't built to withstand something that could climb steel framework and had the intelligence to understand structural vulnerabilities. The attack came on my 20th night. I was monitoring the forest below when I heard the first sounds. Multiple heavy bodies moving through the trees, approaching from all directions simultaneously. The creatures were coordinating their assault, using the darkness and their knowledge of the tower structure to maximum advantage. The first one appeared at the base of the access ladder, climbing with surprising speed and agility. I grabbed my emergency flare gun and fired a warning shot, hoping to scare it away. The flare illuminated the creature clearly as it climbed. Massive shoulders, arms reaching nearly to its knees, and a face that was nightmare fuel made real. But what stopped my heart was what I saw woven into its matted fur: human hair, long strands of different colors braided into its coat like trophies, and among the hair, what looked like pieces of human scalp. This thing wasn't just some unknown animal. It was a predator that had been hunting humans, collecting parts of its victims as some kind of twisted decoration. The creature continued climbing despite the flare, showing no fear of the fire or light. I fired a second flare directly at it, but it simply batted the burning projectile away and kept ascending. That's when I heard the sounds from below. Multiple sets of claws on metal, all the support legs being climbed simultaneously. They weren't just sending one scout, they were mounting a coordinated assault on all sides of the tower. I barricaded myself in the cabin, using my cot and equipment to block the hatch. The windows were my biggest vulnerability. Wraparound glass designed for maximum visibility, impossible to defend against attack from multiple directions. The first creature reached the observation deck and immediately began testing the cabin's defenses. It walked around the perimeter, pushing against the windows, probing for weak points. Through the glass, I could see its face, clearly. Intelligent eyes, 2 human features twisted into something predatory and alien. Then the others arrived. 4 massive shapes surrounded the cabin, working together to find a way inside. They tested the window frames, examined the door mechanisms, and showed clear understanding of how human structures were designed. But it was their coordination that terrified me most. They weren't acting like animals. They were behaving like a military unit conducting a breach operation. The windows started cracking under their pressure. The safety glass was designed to withstand weather, not a coordinated assault by creatures with human-level intelligence and superhuman strength. I grabbed my camera and started documenting everything, thinking that if I didn't survive, at least there would be evidence of what had happened. The creatures seemed fascinated by the camera flash, pausing their assault to study this new behavior. That pause gave me an idea. I fired every remaining flare I had through the broken windows, not at the creatures but at the forest below. The flares scattered across the dried vegetation, igniting spot fires that began spreading rapidly through the underbrush. The creatures immediately understood what I'd done. They abandoned their assault on the cabin and began retreating toward the forest, but the fires were spreading faster than they could move. Within minutes, I had multiple wildfire starts burning out of control in all directions, the very thing I was supposed to prevent. I'd created deliberately, as my only chance of survival. The creatures disappeared into the smoke and flames, and I was left alone on my tower, surrounded by the forest fire I'd started. I spent the next 6 hours fighting fires from above, using the tower's water reserves and fire suppression equipment to protect the immediate area around the structure. The main blazes burned out of control, but I managed to create a defensible perimeter around Tower 12. When the smoke finally cleared at dawn, the surrounding forest was a blackened wasteland. Everything within a 2-mile radius had burned completely, leaving nothing but charred stumps and ash. The fire crew helicopter arrived 3 hours later, responding to the massive smoke plume visible from 50 miles away. They found me exhausted and dehydrated, surrounded by the devastation I'd created. What the hell happened here? The crew chief shouted over the rotor noise as they winched me down from the tower. Equipment malfunction, I told him. Flare gun misfired and ignited the surrounding vegetation. It was a lie. But how do you explain that you started a forest fire to escape from creatures that shouldn't exist? How do you describe something that hunts humans and decorates itself with their remains? The official investigation concluded that I'd accidentally triggered the fire during routine equipment maintenance. I was terminated from the Forest Service and faced potential criminal charges for destroying thousands of acres of wilderness. But I was alive, which was more than I'd expected when those things were surrounding my tower. I've never told the real story. Until now. Who would believe it? Giant bipedal creatures that hunt humans, work in coordinated groups, and understand enough about human technology to disable radio equipment. It sounds like something from a bad horror movie, but I know what I saw. I know what was climbing my tower, what was woven into their fur, and what they intended to do to me. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if those creatures survived the fire. Did I eliminate a threat to future lookouts? Or did I just teach them to be more careful about approaching human structures? I also wonder about those human remains they were carrying. How many hikers, campers, or other fire lookouts had encountered these things in isolated areas? How many missing persons cases in wilderness areas might have a very different explanation than anyone suspects? Rodriguez never returned to Tower 12. The Forest Service lists him as resigned for personal reasons. But I've never been able to locate him through any official channels. Sometimes I wonder if he really made it out of those mountains. The tower was rebuilt and reopened the following season, but they can't keep lookouts up there. 3 different people have quit within the first month. all reporting equipment malfunctions and unusual wildlife activity. Now Tower 12 sits empty most summers, monitored by satellite and drone surveillance instead of human observers. Officially, it's a cost-saving measure. Unofficially, they can't find anyone willing to spend a full season up there. If you're planning wilderness activities in remote areas, especially overnight camping or extended stays, pay attention to your instincts. If the local wildlife seems nervous, if your equipment starts failing for no apparent reason, if you hear sounds that don't match any animal you know, trust that feeling and get out. Some places are too dangerous for human presence. No matter how beautiful or peaceful they might appear, the forest keeps its secrets for a reason. Some of those secrets are older, more dangerous, and hungrier than anything our civilization is prepared to deal with. I learned that lesson 70 feet above the Idaho wilderness, surrounded by creatures that hunt humans for trophies and understand our technology well enough to use it against us. Take my advice. Some jobs aren't worth the isolation. Some towers are better left empty, and some fires are worth starting if they're the only thing standing between you and something that wants to add your scalp to its collection. The wilderness is beautiful, but it's not empty. And what lives in the deep forests doesn't always follow the rules we think apply to the natural world. Trust me on that one. I've seen what happens when the natural world decides to hunt back.